Hi, Kaz. Let's look at Chapter 6, the supply, demand, and the government policy. Um, this is going to be a very short chapter, so some very basic concept definitions. But again, if you guys have any question or doesn't understand any concept, let me know. Okay, so you send me email. All right, so we're gonna learn what is called price control. So price control is the government policy that put a limit on what the price is. Now, for this limit, can be either upper limit or lower limit. Now, if it's an upper limit, we call this a price ceiling. So price ceiling is a legal maximum price on a good and service. That's called a price ceiling. Um, Example for it is called rent control. Now we don't have this in Houston area, but if you guys live in New York or San Francisco, then in many neighborhoods in those cities, you do have a rent control apartment where the government put a ceiling on what the apartment rent is. So you cannot go above the limit. So that's called price ceiling. A price floor is a legal minimum price on good and service. An example for it can be minimum wage. So minimum wage right now at 7.25 for the federal minimum wage. That means you can pay somebody, but it has to be above 7.25. So 7.25 is the absolute minimum for it. So it's called price floor. And then tax, sink tax is the difference between how much buyer pays and how much seller receive. So if you have the price for buyers minus the price for sellers, that's how much our tax is. And then for this tax question, only thinking about this sales tax, okay? Sales tax. All right. So let's suppose we have this market over here, the market for apartment. So suppose currently with no government control, the price equilibrium price is at $800. So that's equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. And then next, government says we're gonna put a price ceiling, and the price ceiling is at $1,000. Now remember this: anytime if your price ceiling is above equilibrium price, then this ceiling we call it not binding because this ceiling will have no effect on the marketplace. Think it this way: suppose that let's say you drive on the highway every day. So let's say you go 65 miles per hour, 65 miles per hour on highway every day. And then tomorrow, government says, oh, by the way, the new speed limit is going to be 125 miles per hour. Now, should you go above that? Not really, right? You still go 65 miles per hour. So anytime if your limit, if your ceiling is placed above what you already is, then this wouldn't change anything. So we call this non-binding. Now, vice versa, if you have a ceiling that's below the equilibrium, so now let's say the new price ceiling is at 500. So now we have to change because our old price 800, this is above the limit. This is above the ceiling, which is not good. We had to lower it to 500. So if you have a price ceiling that's below equilibrium price, we call this price ceiling a binding constraint. And when you have a binding constraint, this will cause some change in the economy. Now, first of all, it will lower the price from 800 to 500. And then second, at a lower price level, our quantity demanded is 400. Our quantity supplied is 250. So if you remember from chapter 4, if your QD is more than QS, this is a shortage. So with a binding constraint, you will have some shortage in the economy. Okay, so the one downside of a binding constraint that we're going to be creating some shortage in the economy. Now, second, let's look at the minimum wage, so unskilled labor market. So let's say currently the equilibrium price is at $6 per hour, and then our government says the new minimum wage will be set at $5 per hour. Now, will this have any change? Well, because this is the price floor, so this is the legal minimum price. So if your current price $6, which is already above the minimum, you don't have to change. This wouldn't cause any change. So if your price floor is above the equilibrium price, this is called not binding. Now, however, if your price floor is placed above the equilibrium price, so let's say at 7.25, this will cause some change because our old price of $6, this is way too low, has to be a little higher. So this 7.25, which is above your equilibrium price, this higher price floor is called a binding constraint. Now, with the binding constraint, this will definitely change the price in the marketplace. So with the binding constraint, the new price will be at 725. But however, at 725, this is our quantity supplied of 550. This is our quantity demand of 400. So we have quantity supply that's more than quantity demand, and this is called surplus. So one of the downside of a higher minimum wage is that this will be creating some labor surplus. And for labor surplus, we also call this unemployment. So one of the downside of a higher minimum wage is that this will also creating more unemployment among the unskilled labor market. All right, so let's get this. Tax, remember we said before, so think tax as the difference between how much buyer pays and how much seller receive. So let's suppose we have a market here. So we have a market for pizza with no tax right now. The price is $10, quantity is 500. And let's suppose government says we're going to put a tax on it. And then the tax will be $1.50. Now, for this tax, what it does, it will increase the price of pizza by $1.50 at every single quantity level. So which means this will lower our demand. So lower demand because when pizza getting more expensive, we do buy less pizza. So with a new tax of $1.50 on the demand on the buyers, we're gonna shift our demand curve lower by exactly $1.50. So we're gonna go from D1 to D2, and then the difference between the two lines, this is our tax. So from let's call this one equilibrium 1. Let's call this one equilibrium 2. So we can go from this point to this point, which means the demand curve is shift lower. But your new equilibrium wouldn't be at this point right here. Because remember, equilibrium is when the demand is intersecting with our supply curve. So if you look at this new demand curve and then our old supply curve, this point is actually our new equilibrium. So this has some special properties. That at this point, your quantity will be less at 450. I mean, that's obvious, right? Because if you do put a tax on buyers, the price become higher, then consumer buys less. So quantity does goes down. But this price for sellers, now remember, the PB, that's how much buyer pays. PS is how much seller receive. So we're saying that when the demand curve will shift lower by $1.50, the new price that's receiving by the sellers is now at $9.50. Now remember, before this tax, this was the buyer price and seller price. So before tax, both buyer and seller were both receiving $10 and paying $10. But now with a tax on buyers, the seller is receiving $9.50 now. So seller is receiving less money. At the same time for buyers, now to find out how much buyer pays, you go from this intersection, go up to your old demand curve, and there you'll find out how much buyer pays. So buyer pays at $11. So with this tax in place in the marketplace, buyers, their new price goes to 11. Sellers, their new price go down to 9.50. So what that means for this tax, the buyer, they paid a $1 tax. Because before the tax, the buyer was paying $10. And now with the tax, they're paying $11 now. So buyer pay $1 tax, and then the tax on sellers is 50 cents. So because before they was receiving $10 and now they're only receiving $9.50, so seller receive 50 cents less. So with this $1.50 tax, buyer paid $1, seller paid 50 cents, and together is $1.50 tax for the market. So this tax is shared between buyer and sellers. Now you might think, why the hell would a seller want to pay some part of the buyer tax? Now, if you guys pay attention to the commercials when you drive your car, sometimes you have certain like a furniture company says, "Hey, if you come buy our furniture, we pay for your sales tax." Well, why? Well, the reason why is that if you buy the furniture from the company, and then even though they pay your sales tax, they might still make some money off you. But if you don't buy it, they don't make any money off you. So, making some money is better than making no money. Therefore, they want to pay part of your sales tax. So same thing over here, that if this price goes up too high, then when buyer don't buy enough, company lose money. So company in this case over here, they have an incentive to pay part of the tax for the sellers. So therefore, for this tax, even though the total tax is $1.50 on the buyers, but it's shared. the buyer pays $1 and then seller pays 50 cents for the tax. Okay. All right, now this buyer pays $1, seller pays 50 cents. It's called the incidence of tax. That shows how much the tax burden is on each party of the transaction. Now, let's suppose we do a tax on sellers. So we say that we're going to place a same $1.50 tax on the seller instead of buyers. Now, if you put a tax on buyer, demand curve goes lower. If you put a tax on sellers, supply curve goes higher. So supply curve shift higher by exactly $1.50. So we're going to have new supply curve, and this difference is how much tax we have. And then we have this new intersection. Now, at this new intersection, because this intersection is on the old demand curve, that's how much your buyer price is. And then to find the seller price, go down to the old supply curve. That's the price for the seller. So so buyer pays 11, seller pays 9.50, and then which means that the difference is $1.50. And then if you look at the tax for buyers, so before buyer was paying $10, now they're paying 11. So buyer pays $1 tax. And then for the sellers, before they're receiving $10, now receiving $9.50. So sellers is paying 50 cents tax. So again, doesn't matter who you place the tax on, the end result is all the same. Remember we did it before we put a tax on buyers, and then it was $1 tax for buyer, 50 cents for sellers. And now we do the tax on the sellers, we still have $1 for the buyer and the 50 cents for the sellers. So the term with the tax is it doesn't matter who you put a tax on between buyer and sellers, the end result is all the same. Okay. Let me see. All right, so what determines who pays a bigger portion of the tax? Now remember in the example before we said the tax on buyers was $1, and then the tax on sellers was 50 cents, right? So what determines who pays more, who pays less? What is this thing over here, elasticity? So what you learn in chapter 5. So remember this, between two parties, whoever is more elastic will pay a lower portion of the tax. And whoever is more inelastic will pay a higher portion of the tax. So let me repeat, okay? So between buyer and sellers, whoever is more elastic, so they have more choice available, then they will pay a lower portion of the tax. And then whoever is inelastic, they will pay a higher portion of the tax. Okay, so you should write it down. So one more time, if you're elastic, you pay a lower tax. If you're inelastic, you pay a higher tax. All right, let me see what else is there in chapter 5 or chapter 6. Oh, that's it for chapter 6. It's a very short chapter. All right, guys. So again, have any question, let me know. Okay. Good luck on your homework. And then we're going to talk about chapter 7 in the next video. All right. See you later. Bye-bye.